Let me say good evening to everybody. I want to welcome everybody who decided to join us for class this evening. First of all, let me welcome our classmates, all 9 of you, in addition to those of you who are joining in to hear Mr. Felton speak this evening. Our speaker is Felton Foushee. Felton is a former student. He's actually a graduate of UNC Greensboro. He has a master's from DO-NCCU, Master's in History, and he is now pursuing the PhD at UNCG. He is at the dissertation point, so we're glad to have him with us this evening. Felton has his hands in a whole lot of stuff, a lot of community-based programs. His attachment to Orange County is the fact that he is on the Historic Hills Board Commission at Burwell School. And so without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started. Felton, it's yours. Take it away.
All right. I greatly appreciate the opportunity to speak with you, Dr. Parker, and some of your colleagues and community members and students. And I remember being there, and I'm grateful to have had that experience as well. And just thankful that you think enough of me to ask that I participate in this space. And I do see some of my RELC and grown folks business attendees in attendance as well. So hello to you all. Dr. Parker asked me to do this, and I was on the fence about how to go forth and whether this was to be a presentation by the books. I'm sorry, presentation by the books, or whether this was to be what I hoped it would be, which is an engagement and exchange of information. I think information being in Dr. Parker's title for what he does here in this space being critical. I think we need to have more information exchanges. Although I might be the person here to speak this evening, I still consider this an opportunity to exchange thoughts and ideas about certain matters. So I'll say what I say about what I attempt to do in academia and in the community. I will try to follow the script as it was communicated. Dr. Parker, I think, titled it Black Americans in the 20th Century. But he did say in the first communication to you all that I kind of try to focus on the specificity of Black Americanness, Black masculinity to a degree, and also depictions of Black Americans in media. Of course, our primary media being television and film. I wanted to kind of frame today by sharing my screen and playing a couple of videos or clips from YouTube. YouTube is a very useful space to you students on here that may be dealing with some topic of interest that you need to find some archival footage, which would be a primary source to wrestle with. I thoroughly encourage your usage of it. And I say get to it before you can't find it anymore as well, because at some point we run the risk of things disappearing that were once easy to locate on the internet. So I want to play 3 short clips, one of them not in its entirety because I wanted to just utilize an aspect of something that was discussed by Malcolm X years ago. Early 60s, of course, before 63, I believe, is what the date that's marked on the clip. In that clip, he's speaking about black celebrities being the primary persons that are tapped to talk on issues that affect the Black community at that time in the early 60s, and I think we still wrestle with that today. So that is something that I engage in discussions about regularly. I think it's a form of exploitation. So I wanted to play that clip, then I'll play a clip of Fannie Lou Hamer it might be, yeah, Fannie Lou Hamer, discussing Mississippi during 1968, amazing primary source, and also someone that you would consider basically giving energies towards what we call bottom-up history. Although she's a well-known figure, she actually came from those places and spaces in Mississippi that were dealing with social unrest during that period of time. So I'll play a clip where she says some important things I think that are worth highlighting for the specificity element associated with Black Americanness. And then I'll wrap it up with a clip from MLK, where it's one of the last times he was captured speaking passionately about something that I think is still very pertinent today, and that's understanding the potential for a strong, significantly strong argument towards reparations. And not many people are aware. Some people have never seen this clip, and some people are not aware of Dr. King's position before he was taken from us way too soon. So those things are framed today somewhat. They're really short. I'm going to stop the Malcolm X clip before he gets into talking a little controversially about MLK, because it's not for the purposes of us today. But I like things in context. What I'm getting out of that first 50 seconds or so is for the context of what we'll be talking about this evening. So I'm going to do the technical stuff and share this screen and all of that jazz and see if we can get this thing going. Let me see. Share screen. Boom. Okay. Here we go. Right, that's it for that one. As soon as I figure out how to get out of this thing, boom.
Now, Felton, we didn't hear that.
Oh, you could. So
No.
that's the thing. So I know it's something about sharing screen. I'm sorry about that.
Okay, what you might want to do is just hit share screen and then make sure that you share your sound as well.
Yeah, there's always some kind of little trick to this, and I apologize. And then I couldn't see you guys because I was trying to make sure my picture was all the way visible. Let me see.
When you say share screen, there's a little box there for you to share sound as well.
Share sound as well. I see it, Dr. Park. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, we'll try that again.
Okay.
Concerning the poll taken by Newsweek magazine, I think you said that this was the leaders who said that, who went with King and against Mr. Muhammad around 90%. I just told you a little while ago, these leaders that they call leaders, this included Lena Horne, this included Dick Gregory, and this included comedians, comics, trumpet players, baseball players. Show me in the white community where a comedian is a white leader. Show me in the white community where a singer is a white leader, or a dancer or a trumpet player is a white leader. These aren't leaders. These are puppets and clowns that have been set up over the white community and over the black community by the white community and have been made celebrities and usually say exactly what they know that the white man wants to hear. And it is an honor, actually.
All right, that's it for that one. I'm going to now, I swear, man, stuff is all over the screen. All right, that's better. Now I'll go to this one.
Mississippi is still a very rough place. You know, people is not just walking up like they used to do in the past, walking out, shooting a man down or getting maybe 200 or 300 people carrying you out and lynching you, but it's in a more settled way. They can let you starve to death, not give you jobs. These are some of the things that's happening right now in Mississippi. See, Mississippi is not actually Mississippi's problem. Mississippi is America's problem. Because if America wanted to do something about what has been going on in Mississippi, it could have stopped by now. It wouldn't have been in the past few years between 40 and 50 churches bombed and burned. You see, and this lead me to say, all of the burning and bombing that was done to us and the houses, nobody never said too much about that, and nothing was done. But let something be burned, by a black man, and then, my God, you see, the flag is drenched with our blood. Because, you see, so many of our ancestors was killed because we have never accepted slavery. We had to live on it, but we've never wanted it. So we know that this flag is drenched with our blood. So what the young people are saying now, give us a chance to be young men, respected as a man, as we know this country was built on the black backs of black people across this country. And if we don't have it, you ain't gonna have it either, because we gonna tear it up. That's what they saying. And people ought to understand that. I don't see why they don't understand that. They know what they've done to us. All across this country, they know what they've done to us. This country is desperately sick, and man is on the critical list. I really don't know where we go from here. Mississippi.
All right, and I have one more.
At the very same time that America refused to give the Negro any land, through an act of Congress, our government was giving away millions of acres of land in the West and the Midwest, which meant that it was willing to undergird its white peasants from Europe with an economic floor. But not only did they give the land, they built land-grant colleges with government money to teach them how to farm. Not only that, they provided county agents to further their expertise in farming. Not only that, they provided low interest rates in order that they could mechanize their farms. Not only that, today many of these people are receiving millions of dollars in fair. The very people telling the black man that he ought to lift himself by his own bootstraps. And this is what we are faced with. And this is the reality. Now, when we come to Washington in this campaign, we're coming to get our check.
All right, so I think I can get out of this share screen stuff now and get back to you guys. How many people had that feeling? What is he? He owns some militant, radical, all that. No, it's stuff that is a part of our complete and total collective history. I am a person that believes that we need to look at the whole picture, not siloed images, not pieces of the puzzle, but the whole picture. So when I look and do research and find things that I think are critical or important or saying things that we seem to have forgotten, I make sure I give them a little CPR if I can. And I make sure I bring it back up for conversation at the least. And I take pride in my ability to articulate things in a way that is not meant to be exclusionary or critical of individuals or groups, but to just give us an opportunity to elevate and acknowledge our shared humanity. So I chose those clips because, for one, they're people that some of you, if not all, should be familiar with. They're saying things in a way that is not necessarily marketable. And we've reached a point in their existence where they have indeed become figures that can at points be used to market ideas and energies of symbolism as opposed to what they were actually going on about during their lifetimes. So I desired to make sure I elevated them for the purposes of how I hope to be received in the spaces I talk to you guys today. And I know I have a lot of time, so I wanted to make sure I let it be known that I am a person, when I'm teaching, especially in person. I've been more asynchronous since COVID happened, but I love engagement and I love questions, whether they're challenging or whether they're just something that's on your mind that you want to share with the group. I'm here for it, and I'll answer as best I can, and I'll defer when I need to. I don't think I know it all. I think I know some stuff, but it's definitely not to the levels of me being some type of omnipotent communicator of everything in the vastness of the universe. So to kind of break apart what was, I guess, the way that my presentation today was brought up, I'll start with the specificity of Black Americanness, and I'll start with that by talking about how I came to a conclusion early on in my what I'll say organic intellectual stage before I even set foot on a college campus. I'm not a traditional student. I didn't start higher education until I was 29 or 30 years old. And I actually went to school for undergrad for media studies, which should give you an idea of why I appreciate the power of media, which I'll get to in the latter part of my presentation or discussion, more so discussion. So I don't know, it was probably around early to mid 80s when I was a kid, and I would look at these that some of you probably have had them, Dr. Park. I know you're familiar, the Black encyclopedias that were published by Ebony in the 70s. I think 73, I think, was the last date one was published, somewhere around in there. That was kind of my introduction to history. I won't say Black history, history itself. Again, this is collective, right? So I'm looking in there and I get to see that Benjamin Banneker was in correspondence with Thomas Jefferson. I get to see that however the framing of Nat Turner's Rebellion was communicated at any other point, it was understood in that context and that work to be something outside of just some crazed wild man's acts. How John Brown's raid on Harper Ferry was communicated. But something I kept coming to even then as a youngster, and even being one of my first books was the autobiography of Malcolm X by Alex Haley, was this preciseness in terms of how the Negro was spoken of. There was a specificity associated with what was being communicated. So as I got a little older and wasn't a very good high school student, and as I, was ushered into embracing terms like African American and such, and now most recently people of color and BIPOC, I always kind of just steered back to, wait a minute, there's something amiss in this pot that we're stirring that is including so many other people into some ideas of adversity and oppression that has persisted. It has been persistent. And I'm sorry, somebody's unmuted or something. I think it's the phone. Can you see who that is? Okay, yeah, gotcha. So when I started really looking at that, especially as my academic career started to ascend some, and having the great pleasure to attend a university like North Carolina Central, I started really looking back, historically speaking, and finding areas where I could elevate some specificity associated with the Black American experience. Before we get to where we are presently, everything's kind of mixed up and combined. And some of my desire to elevate the specificity of the Black American experience is literally associated with the unfinished work that still resides, that the loss of focus on that particular group here in our great land. And what I began to find out, as I began working in equity spaces, I do some work out of Rockingham County, racial equity learning community. I have my own business that does work like that as well. And I noticed that people actually just seemingly had an innate understanding that something was amiss in some of this work, some of how this work was being carried out. And I'm not saying I'm Nostradamus or anything, but here we are on the other side of that, understanding that DEI has been almost completely dismantled, and we lost affirmative action, primarily, in my opinion, because it wasn't functioning as intended in the first place. As you heard Dr. King allude to in that speech, we're going to DC to get our check. He's saying we're going to get repair. And some of the dancing that has been done over the many years since the end of slavery and the failure of Reconstruction. Again, I referenced Dr. King's speech where he's talking about the monies that were given to land-grant colleges to train Europeans up in farming techniques and so on and so forth, agriculture, so on and so forth. You referenced Du Bois's Black Reconstruction, and he'll say clearly there was a complete and total overly qualified workforce that was turned away from and dismissed, as he says, and I'm paraphrasing, as the slow turn back towards slavery began. That's Du Bois. But here we are now. So much time has been lost and so many opportunities missed. And again, including Reconstruction. I think Reconstruction is a very critical era to look at. So any of you students out there who are trying to find something to focus on in your studies, Reconstruction is right. And a lot of academics are talking about the opportunity to really go and explore that time frame right after the Civil War. There's so much there, and there was so much potential there. And it was specific to a group of people. 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment. We don't have the understanding of what birthright citizenship is without understanding why the amendment had to be made to the Constitution, because you had a whole population of people who were born here, born as slaves and such, and needed to be recognized, needed to be given their citizenship. That kind of gets lost as we progress into the 20th and now 21st century, and it becomes about immigration, and it becomes about all these other things. But there was a rationale behind that. There was an understanding as to why it made sense to amend the Constitution for birthright citizenship. So I like to reference a book that Dr. Parker, might have been my first semester there, Dr. Parker. It was Rayford Logan's The Betrayal of the Negro, that he introduced me to. Again, terms like Negro, specific, colored at one time, specific. But now, again, we're kind of in this stew. So with that book, what that book did for me was it framed what happened after the Civil War, this time when the country actually was saved. We were able to come together in a certain way of understanding that Black people were no longer to be slaves here, that this was an opportunity to steer the United States in a different direction. And that gets lost when the Union troops are removed from the South in a negotiation for the presidency. So there's context and there's nuance to looking at history, to looking back and trying to figure out what happened here that makes something that happened down the road not be the result that makes sense for the times. So when I'm speaking about this specificity, when I'm talking about the failure of Reconstruction, when you get Johnson impeached, first time presidents impeached, when you get gosh, okay, I'm blanking on the president's name that removed his troops from the South, Dr. Parker, but that what's his name? Mm.
Rutherford B. Hayes.
Yeah, Rutherford B. Hayes. God, thank y'all. Yeah, I sometimes blank on the stuff, but Rutherford B. Hayes is negotiating for the presidency, and he's going through the South on a tour, and black folks are like, "Hey, wait a minute, what are you thinking? What are you thinking about doing? You and your troops move from the South, and we get just massacres occurring. We get 1919, the year of lynching that was bloodiest on record. So there's this exposure, this vulnerability that is had, and it leaves many Black Americans. And I say Black Americans again because I want that specificity to be highlighted. Open to all kinds of exploitation, whether it be mental, physical, or whether it result in them eventually no longer being here, being dead. So that is why I choose to focus on specificity, because a lot of what occurred during those time frames and eras occurred to a specific group of people. Again, not people of color, not BIPOC people, not even in my opinion, and this is somewhat controversial, not even in my opinion, African Americans, but to people who descended from the institution of slavery. There's a new term, and there's an organization called ADOS that's trying to be more involved politically in these matters, which brings me to the Malcolm X clip. Who are the representatives that have Black Americans' best interests? Who are these people that are being tapped to represent us in spaces, such in media spaces primarily, and say that they're about the betterment of this group? We're still dealing with entertainers. We're still dealing with presidents inviting now. It's not jazz musicians and so many actors and actresses, even though they're still there. It's rappers, it's hip hop artists, it's things of that nature. So paying attention to culture, paying attention to what's current, and connecting it to the past is something else I try to do in my work. So anyway, I can leave some of that there, and if you got questions, I hope you're taking notes, because I'm going to keep moving and leave time for what I hope is a good discussion. Otherwise, Dr. Parker might give y'all some extra homework or something, because I don't know if I have 2 hours of me straight talking. I get tired of hearing myself talk sometimes. So that is that piece of the puzzle that I try to focus on in terms of specificity. Who did these things really happen to on a specific and through line in history, as opposed to spreading things out and saying, oh, well, this happened to everybody, or this happened to any minority group or any oppressed group. And I say all this for our betterment of understanding and potentially our betterment of action, because I'm not being nativist or exclusionary. I'm not saying other groups haven't experienced harm or oppression or any of that stuff. I'm saying we kind of lost our way and our focus, and we didn't finish some work. And everything I look at from a historical lens tells me that. And being that I'm a person that pays attention to media, I see those two things very intertwined and connected. So okay, I'll move on to the next piece of the puzzle, which is, these are all connected as well. Black masculinity is something that I'm paying attention to as I go through bits of research and things that I desire to elevate and write about. And a paper that I'm actually going to get the pleasure of presenting, I'm not going to read it here, but I'll tell you something about it. It's called The Black Masculine Mystique, Analyzing Black Masculinity Through the Female Lens, 1865 to 1933. So in this paper, I'm attempting to elevate ideas and understanding about what masculinity is, of course, and we understand it to a degree. If I just throw it out there as a term, we kind of think of it as being manly, or being a man that provides or is protective, or all of those things that masculinity, not toxic masculinity, but masculinity tells us it is historically. And I reference some of that in the paper. But as far as Black masculinity, I have argued in different settings that in current times, and I say current in terms of 80s, 90s, 2000s, and now, Black men have been problematized with masculinity, and I say, for the most part, Black men have not had access to masculinity, not in the same ways that it has been accessed by our white counterparts. And in this paper, I'm lifting up some of that. I'm lifting up some of that from the time of slavery, and I try to introduce understandings of that some women, enslaved women, had, or even at points the men were free and the women were enslaved. Harriet Jacobs is referenced in the paper, and she is telling her owner that she has interest in a Black man who's free, and he's not having it. And she confides in a neighbor who's a friend of hers, who's a white woman, and she hopes that that helps her cause. So I try to frame those moments, and I have another one with an enslaved woman who very much had a Black male suitor who was also free, and she had a owner who had sexual relations with her when he desired, and she had produced children from these encounters, and she very much wanted to be with the man of her choosing. Unfortunately, that man of her choosing, well, unfortunately or not, that man of her choosing actually encouraged her and said that he wouldn't follow through on things unless she was able to break things off with her owner. She broke things off with her owner by eventually having to kill him because he wouldn't stop. And how she was trying to dispose of the body, it did not work out to her favor, and she was eventually sentenced to death and killed because of the killing of her master. So I frame things like those instances during the time of slavery as the attempt of these women to protect the masculinity of these Black men. There's a vulnerability that is hard to miss inside of the desires of these men to be with the woman of their choosing, all the while it not being their choice. A work that I reference, not so much in this paper, but I reference in these discussions and when I'm teaching on the matter of slave resistance, actually, but of course, all of this stuff, again, is so connected. Rethinking Rufus, and right now the author's name is escaping me, and I'm a person that will drop a book or two, so if you're interested, you can definitely take a couple notes if it's something you might want to check out. I'm actually going to pull up this guy's name right now because I thought it was a pretty... Thomas A. Foster. I actually utilized that book in my slave resistance course. So there are all of these moments that you get to kind of engage, in my mind, if you kind of recalibrate how you view history and how you look at history and how you think things were versus how they actually were. When you find that evidence, you can see that there was a desire at points for Black men to not just exist, but to at minimum perform in the ideas of what masculinity was and still is, I guess, to this day. So I go to a period that I think is kind of crystallizes my ideas and thoughts around Black masculinity during the time frame post Civil War, and I kind of linger there a little bit because that's when you're understood that you're a citizen and you have some rights and things of that nature. But in the early 20th century, that idea is still kind of in its infancy, right? And after the failure of Reconstruction, as we've already kind of discussed, there's this backlash, if you want to call it, or this rescinding of understanding of equality to a high degree. So I touch on the case that I'm certain some of you may be aware of because of where you are in your academic career or where you may be have paid things attention from a historical perspective. But the case of the Scottsboro boys is something I touch on because in that situation, again, I'm able to extract and elevate ideas of what masculinity is, at minimum, what performed Black masculinity is for these young men who, as some of you know, were accused of raping two white girls on a train in Alabama in 1931. So, for the purposes of that portion, which I kind of began with actually in the paper, I actually am looking directly at a lady named Miss Hollis Ransdale's report on the matter. And not to go too far down into it, but Miss Ransdale is a white lady who works for a law office or some type, or some kind of investigator that goes in and looks at what took place, how did this happen. And in her research, she discovers certain things associated with these young women's backgrounds, some question marks associated with when their story changed from rape, and one of them totally changed her testimony and said that that's not what happened. Even to a point, Ms. Ransdale looks at economic backgrounds. During some of the research for this paper, I saw where one of the young ladies actually, and I think it was Ruby Bates, actually was living in a neighborhood that was a predominantly Black neighborhood at one time, and had moved into a home that was once lived in by Black people. And it was that the reaction of her mother, I think it was kind of, with some disgust, like, this is a place we have to live because of these circumstances. So you kind of, from the way I function in this historian world is I kind of look at all of that mixed in together. It's not just understood, especially during that period of time, which again is not too far removed from the time of slavery, right? The proximity was becoming more of an issue than it ever had been. People often think, and just as a quick sidebar, people often think that, we're talking segregation and Black and white folks were never able to live beside one another. We actually spent way more time living in high proximity to one another than we have in the last 80 to 100 years, because 100 plus years, because there was no such thing as segregation. There was maltreatment, but there was also very high proximity to one another that we have kind of lost, because it's more contemporary to our times to think that we were separated. So that's something I kind of elevate in that paper. And I also look at in that paper the mothers of Black soldiers during the World War I era, and their desires to go to their sons in France where they had lost their lives, and even that trip, because of how much racism played a role in America, that trip became a problem because they were being mistreated during the course of that. They were being encouraged to travel via ship and by means that were not comfortable at all, and not even remotely celebratory of their son's sacrifice. And they were not quiet about it. I talk about in this paper as well. I try to put in conversation in the way of understanding the vulnerableness of Black masculinity and the protection of Black masculinity by elevating Rebecca Felton. Some of you may be familiar with her. She was a staunch racist who, for some odd reason, if I can say it's an odd reason, she was more protective of Black women to a degree. She actually was a supporter of Black women receiving care and services. at hospitals, so to speak. But she couldn't get enough of understanding or announcing that it should be understood that we couldn't lynch enough black men. So fascinating character she was, and I think she was elected to Senate or something. She might have been the first woman elected to Congress or Senate or something. But so I look at her and I look at Ida B. Wells, who, if you guys are not familiar with Ida B. Wells, she was very much a supporter of black men's lives at the time when they were really just left high and dry in terms of how much lynching was taking place during that period of time. And she actually was loud and boisterous about the fact that it wasn't okay to just dismiss the lives of black men for these supposed infringements on, at points, the chastity of white women. So that's there in this paper as well. I'm desiring to have conversations from a historical standpoint that I think are worthy. I'm not making some of this stuff about so much about culture or so much about psychology, and that's where a lot of ideas and energies around black masculinity or masculinity itself, they kind of fall under that umbrella of some type of conscious study or something. But these things are apparent from a historical standpoint as well. So that's one of my goals with this paper, and I will be presenting it at FSU at a conference they're having in, I think it's March 22nd, and then in Maryland at University of Maryland and the first week of April. So I still got to tighten it up a little bit, but the proposal's been accepted, so I just gotta get the rest of that together. So that's kind of where I am, especially being able to look backwards, to look forward, in my the way I approach being a historian, to go and see those things argue for or against during that period of time, to understand the framing of why we still are dealing with some of the residuals associated with black men being perceived as some type of beast or monster, or not being recognized for their humanity in a way that gives pause to how they may be treated in society. I'm reminded of a piece of a part in the paper where I cover, I want to say I got this book from, I feel like it was UNC. I know it was published by UNC many moons ago. And in this book, I believe it's a mother talking to her grandmother or mother, and they're having a conversation, and it's about her staying out too late or whatever, and she's trying to scare her into making sure she comes home before it gets too dark, and she basically tells her to watch out for the big black man that might do some harmful things to you if you get caught out there slipping. And that's literally a framing inside a work that's in media, something I make sure I keep in my conversations, media in all its forms, but it crystallizes an idea associating black men with the harmful stereotype, a dangerous stereotype that justifies someone like Rebecca Felton's positionality in devaluing a black man's life. And if you guys are familiar with some of her story, she's going back and forth with a newspaper publisher, a black newspaper publisher in I think his name was Manley, if I'm not mistaken, in Wilmington, where she's calling out, for the safety of white women from the sexual beasts that are black men, and he's responding to her with, hey, those relationships are consensual. And I've seen it happen both ways. And that is literally a precursor. This is some of the animus that's building up. And this is right before the Wilmington Massacre occurs. That was one of the things that was stirred in the pot of causation, the notion that white women were being assaulted or potentially going to be assaulted by black men. So yeah, lot of things to kind of look at these different eras and extract and understand why there's a through line of support for certain ideas associated with Black American men, in my opinion. So that's sort of what I'm trying to again highlight in this paper and put forth. And then keeping that energy around media going, because that is my primary focus, and all of this kind of fits into that. My thesis at Central was Black radicalism and Black masculinity in film, 1969 through 1974, I believe. And in that thesis, I looked at Gordon Parks' The Learning Tree, a film which I actually got played here. It was played in I'm on the board of the Greensboro, Carolina Theater, and we played that film last night here. And it was Gordon Parks' The Learning Tree, which came out in '69. Sweetback's Badass Song by Melvin Van Peebles, which came out in '71, and it was understood to be the first film, the first blaxploitation era film. I'll explain that a little bit more in just a moment. And then in '74, I believe that was the year that The Spook Who Sat by the Door came out, which was based on a book written by Sam Greenlee, and directed by Ivan Dixon. Ivan Dixon, for those of you who may or may not recognize the name, he played on a very popular show, I think it was the late '60s, early '70s, Hogan's Heroes. And he also had a role in Car Wash. He was a pretty, one of his movies that he's more known for is Nothing But a Man. That's another one of his films as well. Funny side note to that, I had begun working on this thesis at Central, and I'm walking around one day, finally going to the cafeteria to try out some food, and I see a plaque on the wall, and it's of Ivan Dixon. I had no clue that he even went to Central, and that kind of made me feel that I was on a pretty good path to incorporate him into my thesis, because I did actually make sure he was featured in my thesis in a certain way, because he was very much, as I think all of these men I just mentioned, was really focused on what was being depicted or communicated via our greatest form of communication, media. So he was careful with how he created, shot, directed, acted in all of these works that he got the opportunity to. So there's something to be celebrated for that, from my purview. So that was my thesis, right? I focused on these Black males who made films during an era that was right after the Civil Rights Movement, that was right before blaxploitation and right during blaxploitation. And the blaxploitation era, as I said I would explain, is not just this, oh my gosh, Black movies are a hit era. It is a time when, based on my observation, it is understood that the dollar of Black people is valuable to Hollywood productions. It is a time when you can see a detachment from so many stereotypical, just taken on the chin performances. I actually look at Sidney Poitier to a degree in that thesis. You can see where his career was kind of understood to be one thing, where he was more docile, he was noble, he was going to do the right thing no matter what. And then in I believe it was 68 or 60, might have been 69 as well. In the heat of the night, he gets to smack a white guy back on a TV screen, and that kind of invigorates ideas around what's possible in this medium. And then it kind of goes by the wayside, and that's when it becomes the blaxploitation era, because Hollywood says, "Oh, you guys saved us. The black dollar saved Hollywood. It's researchable. You can look it up. The blaxploitation era saved Hollywood. Hollywood was going broke, but they start making all of these black movies, and they say black people want to see themselves on the screen, but we lost some of the momentum for fully realized depictions and things that might be respectable. And I'm not saying everything has to be, but the scales kind of get tilted a certain way, and it kind of gets stuck there a little bit. You have moments where you'll see something that's worth celebrating or worth engaging in, and you can feel good about watching it. But then there's this bunch of stuff that comes out in the 70s and into the 80s even, and somewhat today, of caricatures, stereotypes, just always to make you laugh or to try to make you laugh, and you lose the three-dimensional dynamic. So I began with the Learning Tree because Gordon Parks was not just a filmmaker. Gordon Parks was one of my favorite people to really look at from a historical perspective, because he was a Renaissance man. He should, in my opinion, be more celebrated by America, and he is celebrated. But I mean, he should be on some top tier levels with everything that he did artistically in this country. He was a photographer, a writer, an artist. He actually did some artwork, and he wrote a book called The Learning Tree, which was loosely based on his life in Kansas. And because he was in the circles and spaces that he was in, being a person who had been a photographer since, I believe, the 30s. He actually worked on the WPA project as well. So he had connections that may not have been had by most people, and he was welcome in certain spaces. And there became a lot of energy around making his book into a movie. And that's exactly what happened. He had never directed a film before, but he gets the opportunity to direct this film, which is now in the National Archives. Is understood to be a tremendous work of art for what it brought to the screen in 1969 in terms of presenting an opportunity to truly engage with Black American life in 1920s Kansas. And again, for my purposes, it checked a significant box of fully developed characters, humanization. I thoroughly suggest to you all to check out The Learning Tree if you get a chance. It still holds up, and it's a very fulfilling film to watch, to learn about the angst of a teenage Black kid growing up in Kansas, and it's worthy. Sweetback's Badass Song was, again, the film that's understood to be the one that kicks off blaxploitation. Melvin Van Peebles makes this movie on a shoestring budget, but one thing he does bring to the screen, along with some other stuff that is kind of controversial because it was rated X. That X rating don't even hold a candle to a PG movie these days, but back then it was super controversial, and he rode with it, and that film made a lot of money for a little investment. And it kind of, again, that showed Hollywood. Hollywood said, what's going on here? This film made that kind of money on this shoestring budget and the minimal release, et cetera, et cetera. And Melvin Van Peebles goes on and has a wonderful career. And some of you might know his son, Mario Van Peebles. He directed New Jack City in the early 90s. And then Ivan Dixon and Sam Greenlee. Sam Greenlee wrote this book called The Spook Who Sat by the Door. It's about a Black, I always get it mixed up if it was FBI or CIA. I think it was FBI. CIA, a Black CIA agent, yeah, who kind of just hangs around and is not taken seriously. He goes in on what we would consider affirmative action. He applies for the job because they saying they got to meet a quota of hiring some black men, and they hire some black men, and these men are some of them are taking it seriously, some of them are not. Look at all the nuance in that story. So some of them are not taking it seriously. This guy is, and he really just hangs out and learns all he can about espionage and et cetera, et cetera. and he goes back to his community and utilizes his knowledge to start a revolution. Book was very controversial. The film was just as, if not more. It was literally banned. It was literally given such short runs, and it didn't even make a dent in whatever the box office would have been. It's one of the earlier films that was understood that tickets were being sold for other movie and not that one when they would sell you a ticket. And that's still, from what I understand, it went on as long as we were doing paper tickets. They would sell you a movie ticket for another film and give you a ticket for the one that you said you wanted to actually see. So some sleight of hand, but that film was nearly lost to history. And Tim Reed, this is the version that I captured. Tim Reed, the actor who was it? I think it was WKRP in Cincinnati back in the early '80s. Tim Reed actually had a copy of it in his safe, and that's the only way we get to see the spook who sat by the door is because he happened to preserve a copy. So very, very controversial things take place in the 70s from both dynamics, whether they're mal-conceived images and stereotypes of Black Americans, or they're a little too real, and people don't want to let that stuff see the light of day. There's also films that came out before then, and I'm 703. I guess I still got some more time. There's films that came out before then that I kind of lean back towards looking at in my dissertation. So I'm going to continue some of the work I began my thesis in terms of the Black image, the way Black people are depicted in media. So in my dissertation, which will be depictions of Black Americans in media in the 20th century, the controls of narrative. The goal is to actually create an understanding of the power associated with media, a power that we continually minimize. But media, a la television and film, music, whatever medium you think that is the most popular, are literally the ways that people learn about topics in a more impactful, quick way. So there's power in that, and part of my argument is that power has been misutilized in terms of how Black Americans have been depicted since its inception, basically. So I covered some of this in my thesis, but I'll be revisiting it in my dissertation. One of the earliest and most successful films, The Birth of a Nation, by D.W. Griffith, based on a book called The Klansman, which was written by a gentleman from North Carolina. His name is escaping me right now. Thomas somebody. But I'll try to pull it up because I don't like leaving those little holes right there. But this guy wrote this book, that Thomas Dixon Jr., and he was from Black Mountain, if I'm not mistaken, which, that's pretty fascinating. His dad was a pastor and all this other stuff. But he wrote these books that were to kind of commemorate and celebrate and also acknowledge the plight of the white man post Civil War. Thank you, Cole. Post the Civil War, and The Klansman ends up becoming this feature film directed by D.W. Griffith. Comes out in 1915, if I'm not mistaken, and the depictions of Black people in this film are horrible. The film is actually saying that because at that point Black men received the right to vote, the franchise of voting, the nation was going to crap. And I mean, there's plenty of blackface in the film. There's a couple of scenes of Black people who were actually in the movie. but you have an understanding that is had by our president at the time, Woodrow Wilson, who also, I think he went to school with Thomas Dixon, if I'm not mistaken, as well. He's supposedly a historian. He's also the first Southern president to be elected post Civil War, and he's very much a Confederate sympathizer. And it says the quote is that he screened Birth of a Nation in the White House and said it was like writing history with the lightning. So what does that tell you about the power of media? That's one of my arguments inside of all of this. And what does it tell you about the controls of narrative and who has the ability to produce such fare and to influence a nation of moviegoers, especially the ones that are on the horizon? You have in 1925 another film that I was able to encourage the Carolina Theater in Greensboro to screen, and I hate I missed it. I was out of town, but Body and Soul, which was written, produced, and directed by Oscar Micheaux, who's this early Black filmmaker who creates a film where it's a story. It's not anything to have any agenda towards civil rights or anything. It's just a story. But he produces this film. It's a silent film, and it's kind of a response to Birth of a Nation, just in terms of the humanization that he gives the characters, and one of them being a character that is played by Paul Robeson, and some of you should be familiar with Paul Robeson. He's dynamic talent and actor. And this is actually his first film. Oscar Micheaux puts him in there. But there are these other filmmakers and actors during that early period of film and cinema that are worthy of some scholarship, worthy of being uplifted and acknowledged. And even prior to the film phase of things, that are understanding of the gravity and weight of how Black Americans are depicted in productions. And Orpheus McAdoo is one that has received some scholarship, but he needs to be elevated. He was actually from Greensboro. He's from where I'm from. And he joins the Fisk Jubilee Singers, and he ends up having his own production company and creating all of these performances that are elevate Black American talent, and they end up in South Africa, Australia. They travel around the world, with these productions. Then you get into film, and I mentioned Oscar Micheaux. There's another gentleman named Noble Johnson, who it's just not a lot of information on it. Oscar Micheaux is another, much like Ivan Dixon's Spook Us Out by the Door. We only get Oscar Micheaux because one of his films is discovered over in Paris somewhere in a vault. So and a lot of his work is completely gone, it's completely missing. But Noble Johnson, there's not a lot on him. He played in some early horror films, and he started a studio and tried to direct some films that were centering Black actors and such, but it's not a lot of information on him. So I got my work cut out ahead for him. But there's a woman who is very fascinating, and I wanted to get up to Dr. Parker's awareness. I wanted to get up to Yale and get in the archives, and I just have to figure out another way. But Freddie Washington, she acted in the original version of the film. What's the name of that movie? Imitation of Life. So there are two versions of Imitation of Life, and I was way more familiar with the second version than I was the first. And the second version came out in, I want to say, the 50s. It had a really popular scene of Mahalia Jackson singing at the end. The first version came out, I want to say it was the 30s, and Freddie Washington was a very fair-skinned actress who, if you don't know about Imitation of Life, is about a Black mother who has a child that could, a daughter that could pass for white during the height of Jim Crow and segregation and all of that jazz. And she works for a white lady. Her white child, white daughter, and this black daughter who could pass for white, grow up together, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a very interesting film. It's not the films we make today. We're too obsessed with Marvel and such, and we make one or two here and there, but then they don't have the gravity or weight that I think Imitation of Life had. But so Freddie Washington played the original version of the daughter who could pass for white, and it was because she was actually a black actress who was fair skinned. I want to say in the remake that came out some years later, they actually used a white actress to play that role, but in the original, Freddie Washington played that role. And fascinating thing about Freddie Washington also is that she is one of the founding members of the Negro Screen Actors Guild, and she was unapologetically black. She was very much supportive of civil rights. And there's just, I've not seen a lot on her in my limited research, and I'm definitely desiring to engage with her personal papers and such, and get some primary sourcing and see what she's talking about as her life goes on, as she becomes less and less employable, apparently, because we don't know her. You know, she didn't become Lena Horne. So I'm at the point of getting my dissertation proposal together, and I don't think it'll be a Herculean task to write the dissertation. It is something that I am very, very much into. I do advise any students on here, you know, find what you like, find what you love, and make it work for your purposes of getting through this period of your academic journey. If you're going to, you know, get into writing a substantive thesis or dissertation, make sure it's about something you care about. And this is something I care about. I'm a big believer in the power of media, and I know from my observation, Black Americans have been done a disservice, and a lot of that, again, for me, is based on who's controlling the narrative, which might be harder to discover, but I'm going to try to go as far with it as I can. There's a really couple of quick asides I'll do before I get to the point where hopefully we have some discussion if I haven't put anybody to sleep out there. Again, I'm here for any questions, thoughts, whatever level of engagement you guys want to have. But there was one thing I wanted to kind of elevate that I think really crystallizes the controls of narrative aspect that I keep bringing up for my dissertation. And then another piece that I think brings up the power and importance of media. So firstly, I was listening to a podcast that was actually concerning Pam Grier's career in film. You know, she was the go-to for so many blaxploitation era films, and the gentleman who wrote the movie that she was in, it was like Caged Babes in Heat or something. It might have been Foxy Brown. It was one of those Sugar Baby. It was one of those blaxploitation era films, right? And on this podcast, which I made note of, and I have to try to elevate it in my dissertation somehow, you know, just make it a footnote because it's worthy. This guy was telling how he wrote this character, and it might have been Foxy Brown. It was one of her popular characters. This is a white guy talking about, hey, man, you know, we were just having fun, and I was trying to write this character for Pam Grier, and I didn't, you know, I did a lot of cocaine. And I'm like, how do you care? How do you kind of, and don't get me wrong, it was an empowering figure for some people, and it was something that a lot of folks really appreciated and still do, and I did. I thought she was a beautiful woman to see that powerful figure. But when you think about the care with the storytelling or the creation of that character, not saying he didn't do the best job he could do, but when he tells you, you know, I was just doing some drugs and I was writing, hey, brother, you know, on the black side, he was doing all of the stereotypical things and tropes that existed in terms of what Black American life was thought of during that era. So who's controlling the narrative? That's one thing I'll highlight. The other thing, the power. I love when I can talk about MLK in a way that he isn't talked about normally, and that's, you know, when he's talking about his dream. But you know, he talked about his dream becoming a nightmare. We don't talk about that part very much. But he also was keenly aware of the power of media. So I'm certain. I say I'm certain, but I'm certain that some of you are familiar with the TV show Star Trek, the original one, and you're familiar with when you might be familiar. That was the place where the first interracial kiss took place, and the lady who was in that film and was the person who kissed Captain Kirk.
She was Aurora.
Yeah, Aurora. What was her real name? I'm trying to find it as I'm talking to you guys, and that's partially.
I don't know, but she died in the last.
Yeah, has not been long. Has not been long.
Yeah.
That is absolutely right. It's crazy that I'm looking at this and don't see her name, because this should have everybody on. I think I'm almost there. Gosh, Nichelle Nichols. Nichelle Nichols, who played Aurora. And a real quick side note, she's actually the mother of the Newt, the lead actor in The Learning Tree. If that is something that might win you a prize on Jeopardy one day. That was actually her son, who played who starred in The Learning Tree, which was directed by Gordon Parks. But MLK visited that set. And I want to say it was during his first season. And Nichelle Nichols was not happy. She was feeling like she was underutilized. She was this extremely talented actress who had worked on Broadway or, you know, some play stages in New York, and she was ready to go back to that world. She's like, they're not using me well here. I'm not happy. And MLK told her, you can't leave. You can't go. I'm paraphrasing. And she said, what? He said, do you know, because you are being tasked with this responsibility that you hold on this ship, says the comms director or whatever he was like, that's the most important job. You are getting this ship where it has to go, and you can't give up that role because it's too important. My daughters see you as someone that they could eventually be, and that's something important in that. And she gives that the rationale as to why she hung around, and eventually she did get more important pieces to that show in terms of what she was asked to do acting wise, and she did hang around. But she cites that as one of the reasons she did. There's a high level of responsibility that comes with that job of not just navigating the ship or working the comms, but actually depicting Black people in that sphere in a positive way, a level and ability that had long been problematized by these stereotypes and the stepping and fetching and all of those things that came before the blackface, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm going to wind it down right there, if that's okay, yeah. Dr. Park.
Yeah, we can entertain some questions at this point.
Let's entertain. I think I saw one, but I'll let somebody else control that.
Okay. Open mic.
I think it's a question in the chat, so I'll let that person go first before I ask my question.
So is it the...
Okay, I'm just going to jump on in and yeah, I just, and maybe you did this at the outset, but I don't recall you giving us your definition of what Black masculinity is in your mind. How would you define that so that when I Google it, I'll find out your perspective? It's been added.
Got you. So I don't for the purposes of my research and what I desire to elevate, I kind of leave the definition the same as, and it's manliness. I think is one of the first synonyms that comes up, or one of the first definitions. But yeah, I did mention I equated to, you know, being a protector or being responsible in some manner, and I didn't finish the conversation I started about the Scottsboro boys. The mothers of those young men actually talked to the lawyers and the press about the fact that they were hunting for jobs. It was the Depression, during the Depression, and these young men were in their mothers' minds going off to look for work. And then this happened. So even to that point, I assign masculinity to their efforts to go and help contribute to their family. So in a nutshell, manliness, energies that are centered around protectiveness, care, things of that nature, honor, that's mixed in there somewhere as well. So, you know, I'm not throwing the toxic part in front of it at this point for things I'm looking at, but I hope that gives you an idea. But I'm pretty much textbook. I just assign black in front of it because that actually gives understanding that it's something different, but it's only something different in my argument because it's not been really realized. It's never been held on to. It's been elusive.
Okay. So, first I want to say thank you for sharing your works with us. I appreciate, you know, giving us an insight as to your research, how your mind works, and how you thought to, you know, break this down and from your past research into now your dissertation topic and whatnot, and just bridging that, stringing along the common themes among them. This might be a lengthy question, so I apologize in advance, but and hear you speak, there is that common theme of, you know, Black masculinity, also, you know, humanizing Black men as well as the depictions of Black men, and looking at whether that be it Black filmmaking or by Black men, or books about the lives of Black men and whatnot. Segueing into your dissertation topic, and please correct me if I'm misstating it, but the depictions of Black Americans in media, the controls of narrative. I guess my question is, even in that conversation, some of the works some of the films at least, that you looked at were still kind of, I guess, directed by Black men in a sense. And when you did speak about Black women, it was in terms of them playing in the actor or actress role. So my question is, have you looked into writings done by Black women, or will you, just for the dissertation topic, as well as for Black Americans in media, or will you be doing a balance of both, looking at Black male actors and Black women actresses, as well as Black male writers and Black women writers?
So, for one, I'll tell you, this is the thing about academia. You kind of, as they say, the best dissertation is a done dissertation. So I'm not trying to address everything in my dissertation. However, Freddie Washington you heard me mention her, correct? So she, to me, represents Black women dynamically in that space. And Orpheus McAdoo's wife, she also would be someone I would look into. And there was you know, bringing it a little bit more current. Ruby Dee was somebody I wanted to look into as well. Ossie Davidson, Ruby Dee, you might be familiar with her as well. So there are women that I do want to elevate, and Freddie Washington being one primarily because I don't think a lot is out there about her. And for her to have an opportunity to pass and turn that down during that era, and to actually say, no, I'm going to make sure I'm working towards civil rights, and I'm working to elevate the status of Negro actors. via the Negro Screen Actors Guild, et cetera, et cetera. I think that's dynamic. But Anya, is that how you say it? Anaya?
Anaya.
Anaya. Yeah, I like to try to get people's names right. Anaya, yeah, this is still is to a degree a patriarchal society. And some of my argument where I center Black masculinity is literally, if you think patriarchy, masculinity is not too far from that. And I still say, Black men have yet to tap into some of those ideas that are associated with that. But when you look at the first opportunities that are going to be given in a patriarchal society, generally they're going to be given to the men, which is, a whole nother conversation about why Frederick Douglass and Susan B. Anthony even fell out for all those years. It was because the franchise voting was given to Black men firstly. So yeah, majority of people I will be looking at in those spaces will not just intentionally, but also because of the way things were constructed, be Black men. At that era, filmmaking was predominantly a male-driven industry, and there was still an imbalance, right? So yeah. But I hope that answers your question as best I can. But I'm very much interested in seeing what I can dig up on Freddie Washington when I get the opportunity.
Smith.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you for presenting, Felton. Your wealth of information. I won't get into that because we'd be here all night. As you know, I won't say that. I'm one of your biggest cheerleaders. I'll say that.
I appreciate you.
I won't get into the debate of who's the biggest. not tonight. For the students that are here that may want to do something on education, with the things that have been presented tonight, because as we know, with the things that have happened throughout history with media and caricatures and many other things that have been presented tonight, and of course those things spilling over, how would you guide students if their desire was to talk about, let's say, males particularly, and how they've been affected in the academia arena?
Yeah, I would definitely, and I think if I get to babbling and not answering your question, Sherry, just stop me. But I think the encouragement, if that's one way to frame it, the encouragement for understanding that belonging is to be had, and that they do belong in spaces. I'm a product of that way of thinking, and I'm someone, as Dr. Parker said at the beginning, I'm a lot of places, doing a lot of things, talking to a lot of people, and I do realize that we've missed something by being exclusionary for as long as we have in certain spaces. Mm-hmm. There's a need for alternative voices and alternative ways of thinking to be presented in these spaces, and sometimes the discourager is not always who you think it is. Sometimes you just gotta power through, understand that what you're thinking, as long as you can find the evidence, and Dr. Parker, you make sure you tell them, get that evidence. That evidence gotta tell you something. You can't just be out there making it up as you go along. You gotta have some evidence to back up your argument or your thesis. Hey, go for it. Just make sure you got something there. And for me, the purposes of myself, I want to make sure that I'm attempting to leave this place a little better than I found it. And that means people being more informed, more understanding, especially with what they're consuming. And, I tell most of the people on here, don't watch a movie with me because I mess it up for you. The people don't like watching films with me. Boy, they be like, can't you just enjoy it? No. I'm seeing it a different way. I'm seeing it kind of different. So I hope that answers. But you guys, if you're a student and you got ideas and you want to explore them, just set that path up as something that you can do with support as best you can have it. You got one of the greatest minds I've ever been around in Dr. Parker in your spirit space, and definitely take advantage of that in the best of ways.
He is a great teacher, and I asked that on purpose. I'm working on my dissertation in education too, so I hope that was beneficial for the other students on here. Thank you, Felton.
Thank you, Sherry.
Hi, I've enjoyed your presentation, Mr. Foushee. My question, I guess, is twofold. The first is, how do you feel about depictions of Black masculinity in pieces of media such as The Color Purple, which I watched recently, and also the depiction of Black masculinity in feminist, womanist, Africana womanist circles, and how intersectionality comes into play?
So, firstly, the funny thing, I guess somewhat ironic about The Color Purple, there were intellectuals back in the 80s when the first version of that film came out, which I appreciate. I think it was a very well done, and it was shot in North Carolina, actually, right outside of Charlotte. So the argument from them then, and the argument that is still pertinent now, is that the mean-spirited, almost at that point, Mr. was pretty evil. The depictions of Black men in that film were mostly, I would say, two-dimensional, very problematic in terms of the humanity that is often not given to Black characters in general, but in a Black film, not given to a Black man. Again, I thought the first one was a pretty well constructed film. I didn't think they needed to remake it at all, but that's Hollyweird for you. I call it Hollyweird sometimes. They just like doing the same thing over and over. As far as your second question, could you maybe unpack that a little bit more? Are you speaking like Pan-Africanness and depictions of Black men from outside of America's gaze, or how
No,
are you?
Admittedly, I guess this is an Amer-centric question, is in womanist or feminist circles, what do you think of how, what's your sense of how masculinity is treated in terms of like womanism or intersectionality? Yeah.
I think I got you. It was the Africana part that kind of threw me a little bit. So this could be a debate, or this could be something that's more subjective than actually objective in the realm of academic historianness, so to speak. So I'll answer it on a subjective level. A couple years ago, in one of my other roles as a host of this community focus show called Grown Folks Business, I was talking about some of what I think is a persistent divisiveness that's kind of been placed in the media in regards to Black men and Black women, relationship dynamics associated with respect and whether it's prioritizing feminism and problematizing masculinity, and that's when I can apply that term, toxic masculinity. I think on a media level of what we hear and what we're inundated with, there's a lot of imbalance, and I don't think necessarily truth to how that is being depicted, but there is something there. There is something worthy of us paying attention to. One of the things that comes to mind that caught my eye again a couple years ago, we're talking about politics and it was the ratio of you hear whenever it gets, and we're going to get ready to hear it again, when it gets close to presidential election time, they're always talking about how many black men are voting Republican. And at this point in time, and I'm definitely gray on the remembering of the numbers exactly, it was, I want to say 88% black men were voting Democrat, so that meant 12%. Oh my gosh, 12% were voting Republican. It's just what, but it was like 91 or 92% black women were voting Democrat and 8% were voting Republican. But what is that? 4% difference. But it was made it was communicated in media as if black men were just doing the worst thing ever, and we got to get rid of them, and black women saved the Democratic Party. I mean, if it's 4%, it's something not. But then you look at other groups that were being brought into some conversation around how they voted, and I think Asians were nearly 50-50 at that point, but there was no gender assignment to whether it was men or women. So Hispanics, I want to say it might have been around 50-50 numbers. I'm not sure at this point, but there's this understanding of significant numbers that vote either way for other groups. But when it came to black people, yeah, black Americans especially, it was like, hey, it's black men that are the problem in this party. And for every 2 or 3 black women that said, wait a minute, that's not there were a couple of I ain't gonna say 100, but there were a lot more that would receive more FaceTime on CNN or MSNBC or whatever else that told that line of black men being an issue. So I don't know if that answers your question or not, BB, but I think there is something that we can look at and acknowledge and kind of wrestle with in terms of relationship dynamics between black men and black women in the present times. And that's part of the reason I played the Fannie Lou Hamer clip. She was not on any divisiveness or feminist ideas associated with blackness. She was thinking about the whole and talking about the whole.
Okay, Cole?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead, BB.
Oh, well, just so I understand you, you're suggesting that there's sort of a wedge being driven into the black community when in terms of, I guess, feminism or intersectionality.
Yeah, to a degree. So another quick note on intersectionality. There's some that argue that intersectionality is done a disservice to and pretty much propped in and flattened again what I started tonight's presentation with, ideas and understandings that need to be had in terms of black Americanness. So that's in there somewhere, but BB, it's a slippery slope, and there's not a clear cut definitive this or that, and especially when you bring in intersectionality, that actually, presents the opportunity to be less clear because you're trying to elevate and connect so many different groups and dynamics of topics and things that sometimes fit well together and sometimes don't. So if you have something specific I can go off of, I'm here for it. And that's not saying that's not specific. I hope you didn't take that the wrong way.
No. Yeah, I understand. Thank you for your response.
You're welcome, BB. BB, intersectionality kind of just gets to a point of complexity that can be hard to talk about and be clear on what your position may be. So I'm definitely all things I desire in any space is to be understood and clear. At minimum, clear in my communication and know that I said it the way I meant it. So I hope that makes sense.
No.
Yes,
thank you.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so thank you for presenting. I appreciated all of that. So I have a question, but also just some thoughts that I had. So while you were talking about black masculinity, I've been reading this book that just came out called Tip of the Spear by Orasami Burton on the Attica
Okay.
Rebellion. And he talks about
Okay.
like black masculinity and how during Attica, which he calls it the Long Attica Revolt, which is not just Attica, but like the New York prison system leading up to Attica, and how incarcerated black folks were transferred from prison to prison after they got repressed and like transferred knowledge and but he talks about masculinity and how these black men within the prison challenged white hetero patriarchal masculinity and kind of notions of like the colonial gender like binary through their rebellion, and how they created these systems of care within the prison, which while it was kind of a liberated zone before it was put down. And he talks about like Kwesi Balagoon, which is like he was this queer black male member of the Black Liberation Army who he was called a gender rebel because he was like bisexual. He died of HIV and AIDS in prison, unfortunately. But so, and that also brings, all of this was also bringing to my mind black male studies, which I'm not going to pretend like I understand it all, but it's provocative to me and kind of challenges my ideas of gender and, patriarchy, masculinity, and like the colonial subject, like patriarchy, I don't know, like under white supremacy. So I was going to ask, like, do you explore, I know your dissertation's like on late 19th, early 20th century, but do you explore like masculinity and like, and I remember you said your master's thesis was on like black radicalism. Do you explore like masculinity and black masculinity within movement spaces and like the Panthers? Because I know there's people who talk, like the Panthers are seen as like a macho, like very patriarchal group, but there's also women within the group like Sophia Bukhari who talk about how these were black men who grew up and were socialized within white supremacist patriarchy. So, and they're under conditions of war, essentially. So how do you, like when you're under conditions of war and colonialism and occupation, how do you, there's more pressing things to reckon with than notions of like masculinity and gender. But the men in Attica were able to struggle through those things while engaged in revolutionary action. But yeah, do you explore like masculinity within those spaces or anything that I brought up? Also, yeah. One more thing.
Go ahead.
Jared Ball. Are you familiar with Jared Ball? He's
sounds like familiar, but I'm
communications
not.
And propaganda. Well, communications and media studies, like propaganda studies at Morgan State, and he said this book was like one of his favorite books. But anyway, that's all for me.
So one of the things that I'm not necessarily, I'll say too obsessed with, but I'm appreciative of, and that's why I brought up Rethinking Rufus, another book that you may be interested in, Cole, if you can locate it, called The Man Not, and I'm forgetting the author at this moment, but those works to a large degree wrestle with some of the ideas concerning black men in the ways that are more, I guess, again, psychological and things of that nature. To your point about the performativeness, which I think that's what you're getting at, what kind of looks like masculinity and what can be revisited through scholarship as being understood to be masculinity, what pushes the boundaries of how we perceive what masculinity is. And you talk about the care that these imprisoned men gave to one another, and that kind of challenged the patriarchal understanding that was had between who was overseeing them, et cetera, et cetera. You brought up the Black Panthers. The party was founded to a large measure to provide medical care and social care to community members as well, food, lunch programs. And I was going to recommend a book to you, and it's actually called Body and Soul as well, by Alondra Nelson. And it primarily focuses on the healthcare that was provided. And because of these Black Panther Party members who were being quasi nurses and such, helping people with sickle cell and such, they actually, in some cases, become actual medical practitioners due to that help. So it was kind of, if you want to attach masculinity to that in some kind of way, it was actually being encouraged to take care of yourself. That again gets back to my point of being responsible, being a protector, et cetera, et cetera. The famous pictures of Huey Newton and Bobby Seale on the steps at the courthouse with the shotguns and all of that type stuff is, that's indicative of some form of masculinity, right? And the understanding that they're not just protecting their community from within, they're protecting it from being over-policed, and they're doing what you mentioned about Attica to a degree, responding masculinely to their patriarchal overseers. But I'm not heavily focused on some of the, I guess, more scientific ideas or theories around masculinity. I'm trying to, even though I'm using that term, and I'm trying to have it defined in a way that's purposeful for my studies and for what I'm trying to put into academia. I hope that gets at something that's answerable, or that's considered an answer to your questions. But I want this to I want my work to more or less focus on media to a large degree, and not so much theory that somebody can look at it and change it to something else just because. I'll say that understanding of what masculinity is, and even for the purposes of that paper, is understood to be something in the realm of responsibility, protection, all of those type things. And I'll say this lastly. The intersectionality, when you bring in gender and things of that nature, or sexuality, there's still, for the purposes that I pay attention to in terms of that specificity associated with Black Americanness, I'll elevate someone like James Baldwin, or I elevate like someone like Bayard Rustin, although they are understood from our president's time to fall into the LGBTQ community. There's still understanding based on what they pronounced during their lifetimes, what their priorities were, and their priorities were still dealing with the social issues and the justice issues associated with being Black first. So that is something that we can kind of get lost in our presentist thinking in regards to how we frame people from our past.
Question for you, Felton. What is your assessment of current day so-called Black Hollywood, probably Black Atlanta, since so much is happening in Atlanta, as opposed to the period of the 1970s when we talked about the Black exploitation movies, Shaft, Superfly, and that trilogy with Sidney Poitier and Bill Cosby in the early 1970s. What's happening today? Are we still stereotypical? It ain't happening. What's your assessment of where we are today in terms of that big screen and even the small screen?
There's a couple of answers I give to that question. One of them, I think, is that we're moonwalking to a degree, going backwards in some areas and places. I think there's a concentration, as there seems to always be during these points of cinema evolution in regards to the Black person that is tasked with either being the actor or being the producer or director. We had Spike Lee, you get one, and he's still there, but then you get a predominant another one in the Tyler Perry, and Tyler Perry is very problematic for me. The amount of things that he produces, and in my opinion, the lack of real nuance or the missed opportunities for something more significant. And all of this is subjective. TV shows, man, we're haywire with reality TV that is still scripted. But to me, it's some mal-conceived and just throw some slop at the wall and see some fighting, and predominantly in that space, right up under the Kardashians are black women depictions in some of these Real Hollywood of something shows. Yeah, man. So the 70s, and what I try to communicate in my thesis and what I'll be bringing back up in my dissertation, the 69, 70, early 70s, there was an opportunity. There was a window that opened. But again, when something's in the capitalist country and something's making money, it becomes about just throwing whatever it is at the wall. You can, at some point in 20, 30 years, there's probably going to be some scholarship around the Marvel exploitation era, because they make a superhero movie every 5 minutes now just because they think it's going to keep making the same or make some type of profit, and that's just not the case. But again, I think zero in on this question. Dr. Parker, I'm not very impressed with where we are. Every now and then we'll get a gem, we'll get something that's worthy. The most recent film I saw that I thought the book was better than the film, and I thought the book was just okay, but this film, American Fiction, that kind of wrestles with what you're talking about in terms of what's produced content-wise, and as far as what's consumable and what's popularized. That is centering black people as a stereotype. And real quick, the film was about a author who's a black man who generally writes these highbrow literature pieces, classical type literature, and he noticed he's not selling, he's not making a lot of money, he's not making any money, but he's recognized and revered to a degree. But his books are being sold under, like African American works, and that's not where they belong in his mind. And then this super popular book comes out called Weeds from the Ghetto, and it's a play on how publishers will go after something that they think of as real. This is real. And so he writes something that's purely a joke, and it becomes popular, and he writes it under pseudonym, and the movie's about him like they really like this BS and all of that stuff. So that kind of elevates, which I think the question you're asking me, we do suffer currently from a lack of real control over the narrative. And that's, again, what I'm trying to prioritize, is that missed opportunity of the late 60s, early 70s that becomes blaxploitation. And then we get to today where you just get one here, one there. And there's no reason that the 90s, that when you get this plethora of somewhat quality black stories produced, that doesn't continue. It serves a purpose for a while, and then it kind of dissipates, and then they surprise you again by saying, look, Black Panther made so much money that, we're going to make another one, and, we're not going to really wrestle with any of the stuff that we brought up in the first one, and it's just going to be about, I think some of what Bibi was expressing, the intersectionality becomes super important for this film that was about this black male superhero, even though he was African. That's a whole nother conversation. Becomes about primarily the black women in the sequel, who it's like the men they get beat up in that film. So there's a lot of things to unpack in terms of the day, Dr. Parker, but I could ramble on and on, but yeah, I think that's the biggest purveyor of information, and we better start looking at it a little harder.
Yeah. Brother Johnson.
Good afternoon, everybody. Outstanding presentation, Felton. I hope this is a too complicated question, but given the outrageous sentencing guidelines that affect young black men as opposed to their counterparts for the same crime, do you believe that is an intentional undertaking to allow guns to remain one of the biggest subject matters in the country today, gun control, because there's a theory that if young black men bought the same amount of guns as young white men and had as many guns, gun laws would be passed overnight, restricting people's use of them or restricting people to buy them. But the fact that we have 4 to 1 young black men go to jail for a longer period of time than their counterparts for the same crime. And I just wonder, was that all related to keep the young men down?
I think conditioning plays a significant role in our society, Horace. I believe it plays a tremendous role. And I think conditioning, for the purposes of how I mean it, is I'll attach to media, and that means how news is reported, right? That means how stories are written. Dr. Parker and I'm not going to call it a disagreement, but because Dr. Parker has a wonderful assessment of what he thinks has done more harm to the black community, and I think it's still alcohol and drugs, if I'm not mistaken. Correct, Dr. Parker? So I'll attach some of my leanings to that. Lack of economics. Reparations is something that the opportunity was not taken advantage of when it should have been by the government to do something to rectify it. And that doesn't fix everything. You're going to still have some bad actors. But as far as the gun issues, man, this is a gun culture. This country is just in love with violence and guns. And, everybody's a dote on here, I believe. And some of this is before some of you guys' time. But when Janet Jackson had the Super Bowl mishap in the early 2000s, and it was a millisecond. And I mean, it was so fast that it was a millisecond of her breast showing. And it was so fast that people had to go back the next day and rewind the tape and to catch it. But CBS was assailed and people lost their mind. Some of y'all might be wondering how you attach this to violence. On that same network, there was this popular show, wildly popular show called CSI. You could watch a bullet into somebody's brain in slow motion on that show. Might still can. I don't know if it still comes on or not. But you could watch some of the most graphic violence on network TV. But a millisecond of boob, just people lost their mind. So, Horace, I think our conditioning leads us down this road. I think some of what I alluded to when I was talking about black masculinity and some of the framing of black men in society leads us to a place where we can throw them away quicker than we can anybody else. Therefore, they're more of a menace. So that sentence is going to be harsher, and you can relate that straight back to slavery when it, the Fugitive Slave Act takes place and the judges was getting $10 to send people back into slavery, and that kind of thing, those kind of acts sets precedents. They get down to people, they get through. That story I was trying to explain earlier when that mother was telling her daughter she better get home at night because the big black buck is gonna get her if she don't. Those things get through. There's no requirement for home life to be considerate of the whole. Home life can be telling whatever story it tells. And for black people, sometimes that home life is saying the same thing. You better get yours, don't worry about nobody else. And you might devalue the life of somebody that's right in the community with you, because proximity is what causes activities against people. It ain't just black folks searching for black folks to harm or hurt. You live in high proximity to black folks. There ain't no economic opportunities. Crime is usually going to follow where places where economics is suffering. And that person that you decide to take something from or start a beef with, you got to go home. You got to go home.
Okay. Are there other questions? Joe, I see your hand is still up. You have a question?
No, I don't. I'm gonna take it down. Sorry about that. I am gonna take the opportunity to just ask the question again, because it's a large part of the presentation. Is I'm wrestling with what is black masculinity. Is it shuffling? Looking down when you walk in front of a guy. I listened to my mother, in a different era, and we're represented as a lot of times in media, as you say, as not up to the standards of a white man. I mean, does that mean we can't look you in the eye? You know what I mean? I have all these questions about how you can really help us out with your presentation on that front.
So again, and I'll say this, even textbook definition, which is not something that too many people like to do when they're discussing whatever it is they're working on or what have you. But textbook definition is kind of what I'm going by, Horace. But I'm applying it in that paper in a way that's understood that has never been something that has been understood to be had, or should not be something that has been understood to be had, held on to, and for your question, understood completely from a black male's dynamic. Because as you just stated, some of the performativeness that has been tasked with black men in society at a point in time where, as you're stating, couldn't walk with your back straight and look people in the eye and be able to get off the sidewalk, might be called boy by a white child. Those things challenge, problematize what we understand to just be masculinity. So when I put black in front of it, it's for those purposes. Masculinity is its own term. It's understood what masculinity is by definition. But when you put black in front of it, like you're saying, what is it at that point? So clearly defining that for the purposes of my paper or research, I might need to figure out how to do that more so, but I don't know that it has to be done, because I don't think that we've allowed for it to be done. I think we understand what masculinity is, and we understand when you put black in front of it, it doesn't hold the same resonance. So just real quick, for the purposes of justifying masculinity, qualities or attributes regarded as characteristics of men or boys. So that virility, that protection, that understanding that I'm tasked with doing something that is for the betterment of my family or those in proximity, that hunter-gatherer thing, those thoughts and energies are there, but detrimental when you put black in front of it, because as you stated, as you acknowledge, you can't move the same. You can't be the same masculinity that our white counterparts might take for granted, which I think, if I'm not mistaken, goes into what Cole was getting at to a degree.
Okay.
I hope that's clear. Does that clear things up a little bit?
Sure.
It does. I think that, and I haven't gone through the PhD experience, but I bet you they're going to call you out on that. When you, you go to present, they want to be no gray areas there, right on that front.
And that's the beauty, exactly. And that's the beauty of going through the process myself, is that I get to affirm some things up, right? So if I'm going to use that term, then I might be the one that gets to define it to the clearest dynamic and degree. So I appreciate you challenging me on that, Gerald.
Okay, everybody. Felton, is there anything else you want to add before we call it an evening?
I just see what Salitha said. The movie American Fiction addresses some of the topics we are discussing. Books written for black population, written in slang, et cetera. So yeah, that's part of what the book is called. Erasure. I can't think of the guy's name, but he's out at I think it's at Berkeley or UC or USC. It might be a USC. I think he's out there. But he wrote a book called Erasure, and that's exactly in the book you get the pages where it's written. It's the book he's working on under his pseudonym, and it's written in all this slang and the things that are supposed to be emblematic of being black and from the ghetto, urban, all that stuff. Honesty, did you have a question? Okay, sorry, Dr. Park.
Oh no, it was just an observation. Thank you.
Oh no, gotcha, Salitha.
I ain't gonna be too long, but I just have a question. With black masculinity, do you think there's a connection to like it being questioned from basically single parent households? You think there's a connection between the two?
I would think that people might lift that up as something that might be missing in some young men's lives to a degree. This energy around the absentee black father. The fact that single mothers have raised black boys to such a degree that masculinity is something that might be missing. So yeah, I think it fits that dynamic as well. I'm sure that there's been some academic studies done, even if it's just psychological on that matter, honesty. So yeah, I'm fairly certain that exists to a high degree.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, and I enjoy your presentation too.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I appreciate all of y'all. Thank y'all for taking the time. Dr. Park, I didn't expect to go this long, but hey, it happens.
Oh, yeah. Great, great. For the members of the class, we will meet, of course, next week, and we will discuss, we'll actually begin looking at lynching in the United States. So I actually sent out a number of articles related to that, so we'll begin discussing those articles. In addition to that, we will begin our actual individual oral presentations